Welcome to this section of the Maritime SheEO conference. I'm Natalie Shaw and I'm the Director of Employment Affairs at the International Chamber of Shipping. And it's absolutely my pleasure this morning to really get an excellent panel of people together on women on boards and why they matter. And as a woman who's been on a board now for probably about 18 years, I can tell you the different boards I've sat on. Certainly in some cases I've been the only woman on board the board, and that's actually worked in my favour, and in other situations it's sometimes been a little bit of a challenge to explain things from a woman's perspective. So I'm looking forward to a very candid, open debate this morning. What I was going to propose that we do is, as particular panelists talk, perhaps they could just start at that point to introduce themselves and their background around the question, rather than us doing a long section on introductions. So without further ado, I'd perhaps like to start by inviting Katharina Stanzel from Intertanko to tell us why she thinks women should be on boards. Kathy, please.
Thanks, Natalie, and great to be here with everyone. It's going straight into the question. That's one way of starting it. So I'm Kathy Stanzel. I'm currently the managing director of Intertanko, so a trade association looking after ship owner members around the world and their associates in the sort of tanker trade business. And my experience with boards has been quite varied. So I've been on non-executive kind of boards where I was just advising, trying to deal with governance, etc. I've been on advisory boards that just don't even have a legal role. And now, of course, I'm a legal executive. So I'm running a board, trying to get decisions, looking after governance, etc., etc. And when I was elected 11 years ago, or well, actually not 11 years ago now, but in 2011, it was about the time where in the UK, there was a big research study done by the UK government, and Lord Davies came out with a report in 2011 about specifically women on boards. And he talked about the situation, he talked about why it was important. And there's been loads of research on what diversity does to boards. And I don't think we really need to rehash that. And it's diversity in the bigger sense. It's not gender diversity, it's diversity generally. So whether it's McKinsey or whoever we want to read or whichever university we want to follow, the research is out there, the numbers are there. And we know that in a commercial sense, diversity brings benefits. And whether they're profit or other things, it brings benefits, net benefits. In my particular experience, the interesting thing has been that when I joined Intertanko, we had 2 women on the board. Our board is 193 people. So that wasn't very many. We now have 10, which is fantastic. So we have 5% of our board are now women. And if I then sort of start bragging, we've even managed to get 12% of our little board to be women, because we've got an executive committee. So 2 out of 17 are actually women, which is good. So we're coming up in diversity. Why is that important? Well, I think it's about good decision making, first and foremost. It's about challenging each other because we're coming from different perspectives. And it's really about making sure that in terms of a leadership pipeline, if there is nowhere to go, why would you build one? And if we actually believe what we write in all these reports, then diversity is the answer, because we're going to have better business and we're going to get better answers. And we generally are better in terms of governance because we are broader in our perspective. And I'll leave it at that, otherwise I'll take all your time.
Thank you. And perhaps next I could go to Malini. Malini, as an academic, Kathy just cited perhaps some academic studies, but from your perspective, do you think that we've moved the needle, or do you think there's still a long way to go with regards to diversity? Thank you.
Yeah, I'm Malini Shankar, and my current position is in education as the Vice Chancellor of the Indian Maritime University. But for the 3.5 decades prior to that, I have been a career bureaucrat. And as a career bureaucrat, I have been on boards which are on the government side. And in the last 3 years, I'm a member of a board which is appointed by the government of a group of companies that had defaulted on their financials. So I do have some experience on the side of government and representing the government in the private sector and of course now in education. So like Katharina said, why is it important? I think everybody knows that research has shown that companies do gain from increasing diversity, not just gender diversity, but also inclusivity. And many countries like India have actually mandated by law that companies of a certain size do have to have a certain percentage of women members on board. But why? I mean, why is it important? I think it's very important because society consists of 50% women. And when the companies are trying to sell products and services, a board which is not represented by that 50% is going to make decisions which are not in line with the expectations of society. How do they get to know what the women want? And they do tend to ignore the fact that women may not be financially independent in many cases, but they are huge influencers in purchases in households. I think, and if you lose track of that, you've lost track of certain business sense within the organization. So that's what I would say. It's very practical. It's not just to have women on board, but it is to know your clientele, know the end consumer. And they have to be represented if you want to have effective business.
Thank you. And Lois, perhaps I could ask you, as the President and CEO of International Seaways, can you tell us a little bit about your organisation and the types of people you employ, and also who your board members are, please?
Absolutely. Lois Zabrocky, and I'm President and CEO of International Seaways. So we have 95 oil tankers, and we employ 2,500 seafarers across the globe of all different nationalities. We have a small contingent that is female in that seafaring community, and we really work to cultivate that. And then shoreside, we have around 60 employees. We have a lightering division that is run by a woman out of Houston, Texas. And then in New York City is our headquarters. And one of the things that's mentioned here that I think is wonderful, and about shipping, we have at least 13 different nationalities represented in our staff. And when you look at our board, we have myself on our board, and I have been in the boardroom for 15 plus years at our company. However, I've been CEO for 5 and on the board for 3 as a board member, right? And we also have on our audit committee a woman and a very experienced financial expert female. So of our 10 board members, 3 of us are women. And we just added the 3rd woman as we completed our merger this summer with Diamond S Shipping. And we're able to bring, Kate Blankenship onto the board. And I fought hard for that to make that happen, because I do think it's really important. And our board composition has a lot of financial expertise, as well as shipping expertise on the board. And, I think that it's very important for women to be represented in this very competitive, generally the people that end up on a, this is a public shipping company board, are highly competitive people. And I feel like when a woman gets onto the board, there is an extra sense of collaboration that is brought to the forefront, and it calls that out of and elicits that from the rest of the board, and it makes it just a more collaborative, team-oriented environment. And I think that can't be overstated in importance.
Can I just ask you before we move on, you mentioned about just recently merging with another organisation. How much of a similar culture did that organisation have? And what was the demographics of that organisation? Such that, are you preaching to the converted, or have you got some way to go in order to create an environment where everybody is on the same page?
Well, Diamond S was here in the United States as well, and there was a lot of similarity in having a high governance standard. They had only one woman on their board, but from a perspective of business approach, I think it's quite a nice meshing and coming together. So I would say that the frame of mind is there for a very similar and collaborative approach. So we were lucky in that accord.
Thank you. Maybe we'll come back to that particular issue and maybe a little bit later. I'd like to move now to Dorothea from the American P&I Club. And Dorothea, could you perhaps tell me how many people within the P&I Club itself perhaps are ex-seafarers? How many are more lawyers and from backgrounds, and how many women there are in the organisation? Yeah. What's the makeup of your organisation, and how did you get to the position that you're at and being a board member yourself?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for including me here. Yeah, so my name is Dorothea Ionnou. I am currently the Deputy Chief Operating Officer for the managers of the American P&I Club. I am also secretary to the board of the American Club, and I also serve on the board of the subsidiary which does marine insurance for Hull, which is based in Europe. I also serve on the management board. So I wear a number of different hats within my role with the club. I'm going to try and remember. I won't remember exact numbers in terms of the exact backgrounds, but I can give you some generalities in terms of the club. I do know specifically that we are, as an organization, across the board 50-50 gender-wise. Wow. Yeah. We're talking about on all levels. And then when it comes to management, we're 40% female, which I'm very proud of. And that's also the same on the executive committee level on the management side. On the American Club's board, out of 19 board members, which are represented obviously by our constituency, the shipowners and some we have 4 women out of 19 board members. But also what's great about the board, though, is that we represent every different sector of shipping, and we represent also every different region that we serve from a national perspective, so Asia, Europe, Middle East, United States, and so on. So we have a very diverse board when it comes to its purpose, which is marine insurance, right? So we do third-party liability for ocean-going vessels. A subsidiary does own damages on hull. In terms of, obviously, in order to serve the market, we have ex-seafarers, we have lawyers. I would say on the claim side, the majority of our staff probably have a legal background, even if they might not have been practicing lawyers beforehand. So I am a lawyer by profession, but I probably only practiced for about a few years before I entered the marine insurance market. We probably have a lot of people like that specialize in maritime claims. And then we have about, what we do is we have the expertise that is represented generally throughout the whole, what you need to do third-party liability and service the shipping community. One of the things that I wanted to talk a little bit about, because I know when Kathy said this too, there are so many studies out there that talk about not just gender diversity, but diversity in general, because you need the perspectives. And I think, Malini, I think we're all referring to these things that obviously you're going to be more profitable because you have insight to your target audience, right? You need to have representation of your target audience. But what I think is very important, and sometimes we forget, is the internal benefits for a diverse perspective on your board. So for example, when you're managing talent, right, and targeting retention, you have to have insight and perspective on your own people. So if you're not going to have representatives of your workforce, then how are you going to manage retention? How are you going to manage it in a changing regulatory environment, a changing economic environment, unless you have perspective and insight on the full range of your talent pool? And I think this is just as important as perspective of your target audience. So if you don't have women on your board, then what you're doing is you're not only ignoring 50% of your target audience or your customer base, but you're absolutely blind in terms of your internal HR and operational policies as far as retention or for your female workforce concerned. And I have very, very strong views on what you need to do in order to cultivate that, but maybe I will save that for later when you get back to me. So thank you.
And thank you. And to be truly diverse in our thinking, although perhaps we're not being as diverse as we could be, I'd ask Vaibhav, as a male managing director of a logistics and maritime organisation, to give your perspective. Tell us a little bit about your organisation and how many women you've got on your board, how diverse in a broader sense your board is, i.e. how many nationalities perhaps there are, different cultures on board on board the actual board itself. Just tell us a little bit more about that from your perspective, please. Vaibhav, have you got
I'm sorry about,
okay.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Natalie, and a pleasure to be here amongst all of you. And just to give you a brief background, so I'm the managing director and also a third generation family member attached to Continental Group. It's a family business that has been in supply chain and logistics management, with its roots firmly planted in the Indian ecosystem. And in our experience, I think we've typically been a family-owned organization, and that's what led to mostly family members being a part of the board. In an ecosystem such as India, our company goes back about 3 generations, so it's about 65 years in business, and we've had good amount of representation in the leadership. We've got a strong board of advisory and a leadership team that, in fact, has started cultivating the right talent and diversity to be inducted into the board as time proceeds. So again, as a company, we were, I guess, a little more conservative in our approach initially to have only family members be part of the board. And then with the third generation and with all of us coming in, we realized to a lot of the points that everyone's mentioned over here, what exactly what Malini was saying, and Ms. Malini and Ms. Dorothea was saying, is that, look, diversity is absolutely important. I think sometimes when you're so focused in your you get too focused, you get too binary in your approach, and we felt that with how we were looking at our business. It was absolutely financial, and it was driven predominantly on how the business can increase without ever looking at the softer aspects, is what we felt when we were missing out on. And as everyone's mentioned here, there's been enough study, and in fact there's been enough mandate now to allow to push diversity on the boards. But in India still, I think the freight and logistics industry and shipping per se has not been very attractive for diverse talent in the first place, and it's not really been able to attract a lot of good talent. So it's not like it's been a choice. You've had to cultivate somebody from ground up, and to create an ecosystem that allows this talent to be built and grown within the company over the years to come up. It's just been, I think, will be a very extremely rewarding experience. We've got leaders that have grown for close to about 20, 25 years in the company now, that are getting ready to come in as part of the board members. We are targeting or highlighting some good individuals as advisors to come in. And yes, a little bit goes back to the way we run our business as well, which is family owned and family driven, for which we also had to change the culture internally to say, look, we need to bring in first people from outside and then about diversity, because we are ignoring the softer aspects. What was mentioned, we need to relate to our people and relate to the challenges that are faced across all genders in the company. And I would say we are we're about 300 people strong. So we've got about close to 50 women that are engaged in the company. It is frankly a decent number compared to our peers, is what we feel, because we've been wanting to cultivate talent, and ladies to come grow in the system, because like you said, we've seen immense value addition with a diverse or a different viewpoint in how we look at business. Like I said, the binary approach is just one of things, but softer approach, more governance, a more customer centricity, a more stronger people centricity that comes in how business is run. So I feel that's one area that we would say we've lacked out or missed out. So you don't know what you have till you actually have the members on the board. So I think that's we're yet to experience that, but from what we've cultivated. Sorry.
So you've got, just to recap, you've got 50 out of 300, which is 1/6 of your employees are women.
Correct.
How many of those are on the board? Are any at all or not?
So on the leadership team, we've got one. Right now, the board's been pretty much the family board, and we're cultivating the leader to come into the board. Advisory board, we've got one lady as well who's there on the advisory board.
And what capacity is that lady on the advisory board taking? Is there a particular role which she's advising you on?
She's advising us on our people management.
Okay.
And also, so it's also more on the softer side where we've seen the value addition. We've really benefited with that coming into the system.
Yeah, and as somebody who comes from an HR background myself, I can say that it's quite usual for organisations, perhaps for women HR people, to be the first to sit in what is predominantly a male board. And perhaps that comes from the fact that they've got more qualifications in the softer skills than others, but also more disturbingly, it also perhaps highlights the fact that the challenges for women to be able to get more technical posts and to be able to be taken more seriously in a technical capacity. And perhaps that's something we want to explore a little bit further when we talk as well. And how do we actually make sure that women on the board are not perceived to be token women because they can be a window dressing, in inverted commas, but they're there in their own technical capabilities and abilities are demonstrated when they're sitting there to create credibility. And that in itself hopefully will then drive more women coming onto boards in the future, because people will see that they can make a genuine contribution to the organisations in which they're working. And on that note, perhaps I'd now like to move to Kathy Haynes, who herself has sat on a number of different boards, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about those and the other leadership positions that she's taken on, and why she believes that women can add value at a board level. Kathy, please.
Thank you very much. Yes. Currently, I actually serve as chair of the audit committee for Genco Shipping and Trading, which is a publicly listed dry bulk company. So the way the publicly listed companies operate, the board members are independent board members, with oftentimes the exception of the CEO, as in Lois's case, and the same with the CEO of Genco. So I recently also joined the advisory board of a startup company called Sea Machines. It's an autonomous shipping company based in Boston. This is very early days for these guys, and part of the reason I was selected is they wanted someone with a finance background. My background is a CFO of several different shipping companies. So kind of to your point about HR, women from HR area, also there are probably more women. In fact, there are definitely more women accountants and certified public accountants in the US than males. So that's often in the finance area is where you'll find women on boards. But surprisingly, as audit chair, there are not that many women. So I think that's, but when I was recruited for the board of Genco, that was specifically the position they were trying to fill. And I was the first woman to join. So I kind of checked the boxes of being a shipping person and a CFO background of things they needed. Also, the company up until the time or till recently was mostly owned by private equity. So they put their own guys, frankly, on the board. But now that has changed, and Lois is laughing because she's been in the same boat. Now that has changed, the stock ownership has changed, and recently we needed to add another person to the board, and the chairman of nominating governance was quite firm that it should be, the person should be female and have shipping experience, because again, these private equity guys do not have shipping experience. So they asked me to provide a list of 5 or 6 names, which I turned to my background with WISTA, Women in Shipping and Trading Association, and presented a list of names from which one was chosen, actually based in the Netherlands, even though we're a New York publicly listed company. So that's our, I guess we got a little diverse with a foreigner, and added to the female. So now of the board members, 8 board members, there's 2 women. So that's a pretty high percentage. As far as the Genco's office, there's 35 people in the US and a few around the world, and 900 plus seafarers. I'm not sure if the female seafarers use crewing companies, so we don't really have much, influence yet, although we've gotten into a joint venture. So I think that might be something that will be on our radar in the future. But as far as the company goes, I would say the female positions are pretty much held by accountants. Again, it's typical. I think you'll find that typical in shipping companies also. But to Dorothea's enthusiastic point, I do know when I joined the Genco board, running into the women of the company at social events and industry events, they were like very excited to see a female on their board. So I think that's a good thing. And I think another important thing for women on boards, especially the publicly listed, we're very cognizant now of ESG, and the environmental, the E part, is being tackled and is quite in the news. The governance, also the publicly listed companies have worked pretty hard on, but the S, I think, is the next step. And I think women are probably more sensitive to the S part of this formula. So that's where I think women on boards can add to the conversation. But, and something I do want to say too, is if you're a female on a board, you do need to speak up and not be a quiet person.
That's
I know,
great.
Dorothea, you're not quiet. So.
And now that brings me nicely to Helene Toft, who is a director at the Norwegian Shipowners Association. A couple of points that Kathy just raised, perhaps from being in the UK environment, maybe slightly different. You said you were asked to draw up a short list of all female candidates for consideration, because the board, they wanted to have another woman specifically. From a UK standpoint, we couldn't do that. We wouldn't be able to do that. What we could do is certainly identify positive assistance by way of being able to encourage women to come forward and to give them the necessary skills and training. But we would have to be equal in the opportunities that we could provide to be able to consider anybody who submitted the application, and we would have to appoint somebody based on their merit. Kathy, did you just want to come back?
Yeah, I just had a question about that. Is that because people have to come from within the company? So it's more an HR issue?
No, it's a national legislation issue. The view is but you're allowed to have positive assistance, but you're not allowed to have positive discrimination. So that's the background to it in our legislation. But I know the approach taken in Norway is somewhat different to that. And Norway for many years has, if you like, really been a trailblazer in positive assistance and setting targets for women in certain positions, certain levels. And maybe Helene can tell us her perspectives on this and how that's played out in the Norwegian environment. Helene, please.
Yes, thank you very much, and good day to all of you. It's a pleasure to take part in this panel and in this very important discussion. So my organization is an interest organization representing Norwegian companies within the shipping and offshore industry. And you're very right, Natalie. I mean, Norway is a country that is known for doing very well when it comes to diversity and gender equality, and it's been very progressive for years. But when you look at industry in general and shipping more specifically, actually the situation is a bit different. So what we've done in our organization is, firstly, we started measuring female employees in our member companies. We've done that for a few years now, and that has been important itself. We are measured on different levels because that gives us sort of it tells us where we are today, and that's been important for us. So in our member organization in general, there is 16% women, and on boards in our member companies, the percentage is 15%. So that's where we come from, and that's been really sort of useful to have a starting point. And then what we've done within my organization is that our board has established a task force working on these issues, because generally we were saying this is not good enough, we want to do better. And we established a task force to set some really clear goals and to some recommendations for how to get there. And basically what our board has been saying is that if we are to achieve a better gender balance, we have to work on 3 levels. We have to recruit more women to the industry, we have to motivate more women to stay in the industry, and we also need to get more women into top management positions in the industry. So that's sort of the 3 levels we are working on. And then we set some very clear goals as well. So because knowing where you are coming from, sort of how you want to work, then it's also easier to set some clear targets. So our board has adopted a target of within the Norwegian Shipowners Association that we should reach 50% women in our boards. We have the different boards. We have our main boards and different segments boards, and we have different committees as well. So we are to reach 40% women in all those level committees and boards within 2025. And that's what we are working very actively on now. It's not easy. So the percentage in our organization today is 16%, and we have to reach 40% by 2025. So it's a way to go, a long way to go, but it's really sort of a good starting point. Just sort of knowing where you are, what your targets are. That gives us something very concretely to work on. So that's been really good, and it's really sort of pushing the agenda, I think. And I just wanted to comment in the end as well on why are we doing this. I mean, I think it's really important to be like clear on why gender balance is important, and there's many good reasons, and many of them has been mentioned already. But we've been very clear on that. The reason why we're doing this is that shipping, we need the best people to come and work for us. If we are to be successful, there's so many challenges and opportunities in shipping today. We have to decarbonize, we have to digitize. And if we have to manage that, we need the best people to come and work for our industry. And then it is simply not enough to recruit from 50% of the population. Women are dominating in universities today. We cannot only recruit from 50% of the population, then we will not get the best people to work in our industry. So I think I'll end there, Natalie, in my introduction, but it's for us, it's been really important to set some clear targets and to measure as well, because that's the only way of sort of seeing how we are progressing. Sorry.
Thank you. And as women on boards, or as a man on a board, perhaps you can each tell me, I'm going to start with Malini, whether you mentor anybody, whether you have anybody within your organisation who you've identified as a potential future leader and for whom you are providing active mentoring support. Malini. Malini.
I think my response to that would be, in the government system, it's you have a clear-cut hierarchy with the seniority which is predetermined. But if you look at the boards that I'm on, I don't think most boards have a mentoring system from what I see, and especially mentoring women is more the exception. There have been instances. I can cite one of the biggest banks, private banks in India, which actually the chairperson mentored a whole lot of women who could fill the board positions and went on to even replace the men as chairpersons. But if you ask me my opinion, there is no formal mentoring system in most of the organizations. Only thing in favor of, I keep coming back to government because that's where much of my experience is. So while, it's not easy for a woman to fight for certain positions in board positions or certain key positions in government, I should acknowledge the fact that the government is very gender neutral when it comes to hiring, when it comes to fixing the remuneration, etc. So I think both in mentoring, what's required in these kind of circumstances is actually an attitude from your colleagues, from the HR department, and mostly from the superiors. And Natalie, if I can just share one small experience in my initial years when I started working, I was told that, your bosses do not want a woman there. So would you like to ask for a change of location? And then I said, no, this is too early in my career to, ask. And if the bosses don't want, they have the pleasure of moving me out of that place to somewhere else. And what was interesting is, yes, the immediate boss was perhaps hesitant, but then you have to understand why they're hesitant. In this case, they're hesitant that it requires a lot of travel, and in his experience, the ladies were not, women officers were not too willing to travel, considering that it actually coincides with their, family responsibility, the age factor, you're in your 20s, But on the other hand, what was very, very inspiring was when you went to these people, the public at large, which was a slightly backward district in the hinterland of India, and I asked them this question. These are these small, barely literate people holding positions in, local bodies, local government bodies. It's not urban, it's not highly educated. And I asked them, wouldn't you have had a better deal if there was a male officer in my position? And very interestingly, they said, you occupy a chair and you draw your power from that chair, and it does not matter to us whether you're male or female. So you have this native intelligence which is there in a human being in this remote corner, and I think it works for most countries. And then you have these educated people who are in good positions, who have doubts and who have reservations about accepting you. So, I thought I would share this because I'm sure at some level, each one of us has faced this. And you have to be inspired by the percentage of people who actually feel that it does not matter. And what matters is what you bring to the table as a person in that position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And perhaps I'll come next to Kathy Haynes. And Kathy, have you ever had a mentor, or do you mentor anybody yourself?
Yes, I definitely had a mentor, a male mentor, actually, within the company one of my previous companies. And as far as formally mentoring myself, I wouldn't say on a formal basis. I think more of an informal basis due to like my leadership position in WISTA again, and just interacting with different women in the industry. But I cannot say it was a formal type of.
Has anybody ever come to you and said, Kathy, you know, I'm 10 years into my career. I admire where you've got to. I'd like to understand from you what you think the qualities are that I would need to adopt in order to move forward. Would you welcome that conversation?
Oh, yes, and those kind of conversations I've had more on a one-on-one type basis, or one-off basis, not a continuing mentoring program per se, but you know, sit down with somebody to. And I think a lot of it, a lot of the women who made their way into the C-suite in shipping companies at least try to lead by good example. And again, I felt like actually men in my companies have always been very supportive also and really helped to move me up in the organization. So I'm grateful for them and their forward thinking at the time, if you will.
Okay, I'm going to be very controversial, and I'm going to say to Vaibhav, no, we as women are always suspicious of men having discussions in the men's room, as it were, and us being excluded from that. How true is it that that actually happens in your company? I mean, are the major conversations often in places where there are only men, and therefore it makes it difficult perhaps for women to break into that group?
I would strongly disagree to any such men room gossip or men room discussions that would be thought of, because I mean, for an organization, you know, having people be a part of, we as an organization, and again as a business, have been trying to be more inclusive in our decision making or conversations or discussions per se. And honestly, as you know, Ms. Malini also put it out, it's the position and the seat that comes and brings value to the discussions, and you want to be able to take that in your decision making, you know, because eventually it's for the greater good, and if there is any discussion where value can be brought in, it's always better to have you know, added input. And okay, the decision making is with the you know, with whoever is the owner of the challenge to take a final decision, but it doesn't hurt to take another opinion. And I think that's what's been practiced in our organization and in a lot of the good or better organizations out there, because if you are progressive and if you are looking at growth, you have to be you know, gender neutral. It's what the experience brings to you. It's what that position brings to you. And yes, you have to be cognizant of the challenges that remain. You know, there are challenges like, again, I relate a little more to what Ms. Malini said, because she comes from the same country, and you know, we have similar challenges in the country where the questions asked are very similar. Whether, you know, a lady would be comfortable to accept a role where there are such time commitments, or there is a large distance travel from home. There's safety, security. I mean, these are unfortunate challenges that exist, and we would have to understand of what, and we would pay absolute due respect to what culture is followed. And look, if you talk about India on the whole, it's diverse culture. It's almost a continent. So you'd want to understand what their culture is independently in their ecosystem, and you'd want them to be a part of that discussion before you shoot out a top-down instruction or just a closed-door discussion, because there's no point in giving out something and then backtracking on it, because eventually it's not going to work towards the final goal that you have, which is ultimate success for everyone. Thank you.
And Kathy Stanzel, you know, you said that you've been now with Intertanko, I think about 10 or 11 years in capacity as CEO. When you first joined in that capacity, how easy was it for you to be taken seriously by the executives of some of the major oil companies, which perhaps traditionally have very strong male bastions, as it were, in terms of their organisational styles and cultures?
Well, it's a very specific question, so I'll answer it very specifically. I was very lucky with the energy company execs because I knew them from before, because I had a technical role before where I established who I was and my expertise, which gave me a huge sort of I don't know how to say that, but
Credibility?
Yes, it's credibility. Thank you. It's credibility, but it's also, it's about power, isn't it? And I think it was Malini that talked about position power. And I think that's the thing. I didn't come into this and have just position power. I had the credibility, and therefore I had power to draw on from elsewhere, from before, from a career that was known, from having made those links. What I found really interesting though, because you said how easy was it, that wasn't my challenge. My challenge was elsewhere. And I really like when Lois said, I fought hard, because boy, did I fight hard as well to try and get examples into the structure of this organization where we have women in leadership positions, in roles on the board. And that's not easy. And it's not easy for a number of things. I remember one of my first visits to Greece, I went to see Dorothea's office in Athens, and you had all women in the office. And I think there was one male employee, and everyone else was female. It was revolutionary. I thought, fantastic. How on earth did that woman do it? You know, it's great. To me, the challenge was really trying to convince women to step up to the board, because they were asking really difficult questions. They were asking a lot more questions than male counterparts that I would approach and say, would you like to be on the board? They'd go, yeah, great. When do I start? Or they might ask, okay, how much commitment is it in terms of time? But all the women that I recruited onto the board, and yes, I know there's only 8 of them, but at least there's 8 of them, over years, they've asked really difficult questions. They've asked about expectations, because they don't have the role models in there that they can watch and say, oh, okay, that's what's expected. And I think it links to what Kathy was saying earlier as well. Lead by example. Well, if there is no example, you need to invent that. So you have to ask more questions, because there isn't something you can just follow. You have to lead. And if you look at it also from the numbers game, and my hat off to you, Helene, because wow, that's a stretch goal if ever I saw one, reaching 40% by 2025. I hope you manage it, because I think it'd be fantastic. But really, if you look at the numbers, so I have 10 women in my bigger board, that's 5%. 2 of those 10 are on the executive committee, which means 20% of the women that have managed to step up to the big board are on the executive committee. If I look at the men, it's only 8%. So you know, as a woman, if you're willing to step up, you need to be willing to speak up, as Kathy says. You need to be willing to trailblaze, because there is no examples for you. And you need to do stuff where lots of people are going to ask lots more of you. So you know that the commitment is going to be bigger from the beginning. And we somehow need to whittle away at that hurdle to make it easier to do, so that we get that diversity in there.
And perhaps I can come to Lois. I mean, Lois, you've obviously been on the board for a fair period of time. What lessons have you learned in your experiences of being on a board over time that perhaps you'd like to share with others, and maybe lessons that you'd say, well, actually that wasn't the wisest thing I did at that time, and if I had my chance again, I'd do it differently. So what would those lessons be?
You know, I'm going to flip it around a little bit, and one of the things I want to say, because I mean, this is inspiring, you know, this panel, and I just want to say one thing, which is that women are not always soft. And I find that very often speaking truth to power and having courage is something that is a common trait in women. And I think that's hugely valuable in the boardroom, because, you know, if you just soft, oh, that goes into the second priority. Okay. And to me, it was, you know, it's been all men, but you know, that have supported me, and you know, we need men to support us in order for women to get into their positions, right? And I would say one of the most critical things for me, because sometimes I get a little bit too righteous, okay? And when we were separating our companies, so we were previously part of a OSG, and we separated and we went, I am running the international business. And literally, the former CEO and our present chairman, you know, he said to me, Lois, I don't want you to speak in this meeting. And there were a lot of things going on that I did not agree with. And I think my face was beet red, and I just sat there and I kept my mouth shut because I had to have my eye on the prize. I'm running the company now. And that, and just, you know, doing that made that possible, you know, made that possible for me, and that advice from those guys, because I think had I said in that moment what I really thought, they would have said, oh, you know, she's not balanced enough, or, you know, whatever. And I think moments like that, you know, where someone reaches over and taps on you is really important. And I think one of the things, you know, Kathy's talking about, which is there are a lot of women in accounting. I came up through the commercial side of the tanker industry, where I was trading our ships, right? And there were very few women in that, and you needed to be, you know, you have to earn the best money and you have to compete. And I think I call some of those positions line officer. And I think the more we can get women into line positions where they become accustomed to making decisions and that drive the business, that's so valuable.
I would agree with that, but I would also say that I think there's a danger that when we're put into a situation like you were, when being told, you know, not to speak, and seeing that as a prize when you can ultimately get to, you know, to the table and then perhaps make things happen and make sure, you know, really we shouldn't be having an environment where those sorts of things are happening in the first place. And we need to perhaps think about how we as women can change that environment to prevent that from happening. And it's not just about women. I would say it's also about people from different cultures who perhaps have different approaches to things. And Dorothea, I just wondered from you, you know, you've obviously made great strides in the to get women, but tell me a bit about the broader demographics of your pool of employees. How many disabled employees have you got, for example, in the organisation? How many different ethnic minorities? How many of your employees are non-American nationals? And, you know, just
actually, I won't have exact numbers. So, I mean, in the American Club, I think we speak 12 languages, so that's probably reflective of the varying ethnic backgrounds. Our center, our main office is in New York, which is a mega melting pot. So all of the race and ethnic backgrounds are represented there. But then when you know, go out to the satellite offices, obviously the Greek office is Greek, and the UK office, you know, there are different ethnic backgrounds represented also in the UK office. The Shanghai office, they're all Chinese. I mean, and in Hong Kong, there's a bigger mix. So our philosophy, though, is wherever we are doing business, we are investing in that community, and we are investing in the local talent pool. That is our policy. And we think that creates a mutual benefit both for us and for the community and for the shipping community in particular there. So that's our philosophy when it comes to hiring. In terms of disability, the truth is we actually don't have anybody with the physical disabilities. I don't think that we've ever had the opportunity to it's not that it's something that was not, you know, that would have been an issue. I just don't think that we've had any opportunity to engage somebody with
I'm going to be a little bit provocative now. So,
yeah.
As a club, you're probably aware that a number of seafarers over a period of time perhaps have accidents on board and can't necessarily return to sea-based jobs.
Yeah.
And industry, we are notoriously bad at being able to find opportunities for those people.
Yeah.
Is it something that maybe
it's something that we should look into, actually?
clubs could
Think
look
about. I mean,
at? Because
yeah,
you've
I mean,
got a skill base of people there who've got.
we do. We go to recruiters, though. We don't say that, you know, we don't target specific things. We make a list of what the criteria are in terms of capabilities of, you know, experience and education, or, you know, mainly experience. Maybe it's something that recruiting agencies also have to look into in terms of delving deeper, especially on the shipping side. And it doesn't only really go for P&I clubs or for marine insurers. It would probably apply across the board on the whole sector in terms of shipping, including shipping companies as well. But yeah, that definitely is. It's actually something that I didn't think about before, and definitely something we should look into. I know that we're going to come also to some time here. I would like to say one thing that I don't think I answered earlier when you asked me about my my journey. And obviously anybody's journey is dependent upon capabilities, right? Obviously your talent, but key to that is when you're in your path, are the people around you, or is your employer enabling you to take advantage of your capabilities and to contribute effectively? Okay. So for example, I would not be where I am today if my employer did not enable me. I was a single parent working full time and trying to juggle a lot of difficult things. And when I got onto the executive committee of the management company, and we had to have our first management away meeting, the question came to me, because I was the only woman at that time on an executive committee of, I think we were 14. Now we're 4. But at that time I was the only. And the question from the top management, from the COO and CEO, was, Dorothea, what time and dates and locations work for you? Because we know that you are the only one out of the 14 people that needs to think about who's going to take your child to school, who's going to pick her up, who's going to help her after, and who's going to take care of her while you're serving the business's interests. So if we don't do things like that, and we as women have to remember to do that as we ride up, okay, and we do that. If you don't do that, then we will continue to have barriers on the gender side for women to enable them to contribute effectively. So we need to think about that. We have to enable people.
I'm going to come back to Helene and ask you, Helene, if there's one thing that you'd like to change on your board of directors, what would that be?
Well, what we want to change is very clear, because we want more women. We have a very clear target for that. And on our main board today, we're 20% women, and we want to achieve 40%. So that's a very clear marching order for we don't appoint our board. It's the board it's the members that appoint the board. So that's something the members in our organization are working on. But if I could just come back to, because you said like this setting these targets can be quite controversial, and you were referring to that Norway's been sort of progressive in this, and you're very right. I mean, the first regulation that came on this in Norway was actually for private companies back in 2006 already. That when the Norwegian government set the rules that for private companies listed on the stock exchange in Oslo, you need 40%. That came already back in 2006. So it's not so controversial. It's something that's been around for quite some time now in Norway, but we sort of adapted the same measure in our organization. And the reason why, well, I personally believe is that, you know, if you don't manage to fix it yourself, basically, because that's what we haven't been able to fix it ourselves, you need somebody to push you. And when you have such a rule in place, when you have such a target in place, then it's not an excuse saying anymore that we didn't find someone, because then you just have to look back. You have to look better. You have the target is there, and you have to abide to it. So that's sort of what I think the Norwegian experience has been good in, that it's not good enough anymore to say that you tried, because you just have to try harder, and setting targets like that is pushing you. So As I said, in Norway, in private bigger companies, it's been this target has been, or this rule has been around since 2006, and now we are doing the same within our organization, because it's needed. It's what sort of make you go that extra mile to achieve it.
This week, as you'll know, is COP26 week in the UK, where all the world leaders and everybody have come together to talk about the impact of climate change, how the world is going to change. Why do you perhaps, and this is just a couple of words from each of you, why do you think that the subject of diversity and valuing people's contributions hasn't been taken equally seriously by the UN agencies to look for a global way forward to maximise global talent in the same way that the energy is being put on climate change? And Kathy, I see you looking, as Kathy Stanzel, I see you looking with your eyes up there, sort of thinking about this. Why do you think it is that this is perhaps considered to be less important an issue?
I don't know that it is, but I can't prove or disprove it because I don't have the right data. That's why I was kind of thinking, do I know anything that I could put out there? But I think it's very clear to humanity that peak human, so that the time when we go to the maximum number of population growth, has to occur soon if we're going to be a sustainable planet. And I think there's a lot of discussion about how to achieve peak human through education of women, because it has a huge impact. And I think I'm probably, Malini might know a lot more about the actual practical programs that are out there, because there's a lot of work being done on that, huge amounts of work being done. But I think we might be slightly blind to it. So I'm certainly just not knowledgeable enough. So I don't know that the premise is necessarily whether I would agree with it, because I'm thinking there are lots of things being done. Yes, it's not called COP26 and it's not in Glasgow, but I'm sure there are other things elsewhere that are addressing it, because there's a UN SDG specifically for it. So surely there must be things. But
so what would be the target date when we would like to say that, other things being equal, there would be truly diverse boards? I know Helen has got a target for Norway, but is that realistic for the rest of the world? Dorothea?
Yeah, I think that I also have not delved too deeply into this. I do know that it is, from what I've seen, at least a little bit that I look into, it is a high agenda item. I think from a UN perspective, there is a policy related to it. And I know that there are a lot of initiatives, but I don't think it's an easy thing to tackle on a global level, because you can't really say all things being equal, because all things are really not equal. It is a great disparity across the globe. And so I think you can only attack it, I think, at this stage, this is my personal opinion, on a regional basis. And I think that's more of what they are trying to do. From what I've seen, there are certain initiatives that are directed towards specific regions and specific problems. And yeah, I don't think, in my opinion, I don't think you can attack it from. I mean, look at everything else that we're trying to attack. How long it took for us in terms of climate goals to get on a global agenda. It's not an easy thing, because there are way too many interests and way too much disparity across the world.
Thank you. I've got one final question for Lois, if I may, just before we wrap up. And Lois, if you could provide some pearls of wisdom for somebody who's maybe midway through their career, quite successful and aspiring to be at board, operate at board level, what would your 2 tips be?
Well, so you know, I think that women, have to put themselves forward. You have to ask. You have to push, and ask for those opportunities, because I think that often women are reticent, and maybe try to go toward a line function where you're influencing the bottom line, because that helps get you in the boardroom. And just very quickly, U.S. publicly traded companies, this is happening now.
Yes.
ISS and Glass Lewis, these companies that, you need to hit the targets, you have to have at least 2 women on your board. You need to have an underrepresented class on your board. And if you do not, within the next year, your slate of directors will get voted down by BlackRock and all these. You're not gonna be sitting in that boardroom. And if you want to see people move with alacrity, don't vote for them.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I hope that everybody who's listened to this session's got something out of it. I've certainly got something out of it. And I'd like to pay an immense vote of thanks to all the panelists for their wisdom and their contribution and their motivation for the delegates at this conference. Thank you very much.